Right, so we had this background. Okay. All right. Okay, I think we look good.
Nice. You live? I'll make sure to mute Twitch on my end so I don't
Yeah.
voice is reflected back.
I, yeah. I've done that a lot with having the YouTube stream up, and then I'm like, wait, why do I hear myself?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, because I'm live. Okay. Yeah, I didn't even do a thumbnail for today either. Whoops. Oh, well. Okay. All right. Get my mute thing ready too. All right. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. Welcome to episode 22 of the TCCG Roundtable. We're your hosts, Dragonrider and RonMexico. How's it going?
Hey, it's going great. It's I mean, the expansion's finally here. It's been just all Hearthstone, like nonstop Hearthstone. I I've barely slept. It's just been Hearthstone. But I'm having a good time. How about you?
Nice, nice. Yeah, I feel like I've also not slept really, but that's, I think, probably mostly because the new puppy that we got, which I guess we didn't even mention because we record on Fridays. And yeah, my husband and I got a new puppy last Saturday. So
You'd
I'm
love to hear
very
it.
tired.
Although,
He's
yes,
adorable
I can
and I love
imagine.
him, but I'm tired. Yes. I
Yep.
forgot how much like puppies like to just get into anything and everything and run around and explore, and they're like, "Oh, now I want to chew on this thing." No, don't chew on the cord. Which yeah, I already found yesterday the little it's hidden behind my green screen at the moment, but that little like light box that I have my words on and stuff. Yeah, well, that's no longer going to be lit up because that cord got destroyed. Found
Yep.
that out. I'm like, what is this cord to? Oh no! And then I was like, okay, I mean, it's just that. That's fine. But yeah.
Also, puppy teeth like super sharp, right?
Oh yes. Oh my
Painful.
gosh.
Yeah.
I've got like scratch marks all over like the back of my hands and stuff. I'm like, this probably looks really terrible, but really, it's just puppy teeth. I promise. But yeah, so it's been a lot of Hearthstone and a lot of puppy and not much else this week. Uh,
Understandable.
but I will kind of lead us into our. I guess what we're going to do this week is we're actually not really going to cover any news or any like competitive and organized play for stuff. There's not quite as much going on this week. We've talked the last several weeks about like kind of all the games now have released their expansions, their sets, all that stuff. So we're now kind of that at that in between point. We did get news though that from Disney Lorcana that they did release and announce all of like the rule set, how to play, and that kind of stuff. So I think we are going to do more of a deep dive and talk about all of that next week. But this week, we really wanted to talk about the Hearthstone expansion, talk about what's going on in there, since we both love Hearthstone so much and play a lot of that. So I think unless there was anything else that you really wanted to mention, honestly, we could probably just jump into that main topic.
Yeah, just a real brief reminder again for competitive and organized play for some other card games of Flesh and Blood. The April events, Battle Hardened Richmond is going to be going on starting tomorrow, April 15th through the 16th. And then the first of their two big Pro Tour events is going to be happening with Pro Tour Baltimore, April 27th through the 30th. We'll update you on more competitive and organized play next week for some of our other card games because Yes, that's all I had. Let's talk Hearthstone.
Yeah, all right. Roundtable topic. Festival of Legends launched this week for Hearthstone on Tuesday. And yeah, it's again, as we've probably mentioned, but it's not only just the expansion launching. This is the first expansion of the year. So there was the entire standard rotation where three past expansions left standard. We got the new set in. There were changes to the core set, changes to some of those cards. Like it really shook things up quite a bit. Mostly, I'll say mostly.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about that, but I think for the first few days, like overall, how have you felt with the new expansion and all the changes, just like in general?
So, I mean, playing with the new cards is always fun. Like, first and foremost, new shiny things, and like it's great. It's also really cool to see like a bunch of core set changes and even fun cards came back or old like super significant cards from Hearthstone's history like Dr. Boom is back in the meta. I even played a deck with Dr. Boom in it. I deleted it after the first game because it's bad and Dr. Boom is bad. But that's not the point. The point is that it's interesting to have all these new things, but the way that the direction that the meta is going looks like we're going to have a very early mega powerhouse, and we're probably going to be headed for some balance changes in the somewhat near future, um, because there is a deck that is kind of running away with the meta.
Yes. Yeah. Now I will say I think I've seen probably like Gallon and some other of the devs on Twitter talking about how they kind of have come into this pattern and the cycle. It might have also been maybe it was even Celestalon who's talking about this as well. They've kind of developed this pattern of release, and then about 2-ish weeks after the expansion launches is when they kind of aim for the first balance patch, unless there's like a huge problem that they like have to address, immediately. But there's yeah, I would say probably going to be some changes coming. I'm not sure if it will be the 2 weeks after or if they're going to actually make any changes ahead of that 2 weeks. I don't. Do you think that they really need to address things before 2 weeks? Because the, I guess we can kind of lead into this. One difficult thing sometimes with um, trying to actually go into like changes right after a new expansion is that if you make changes too fast, you don't really leave room for more experimentation and kind of other decks to surface. So, like, I'm always hesitant, like, oh, that deck seems super strong, but like maybe just people haven't kind of come up with something good yet. Or maybe it just really is that strong and we do need changes and it's better to not wait too long. It's just like where's the line?
Yeah, I think when it comes to a new expansion, it's probably fine to wait 2 weeks. Waiting longer than 2 weeks with the way things are developing now probably would be a mistake. Um, what we see a lot in a 4 set meta, it's just so dramatically different from a 6 set meta, which we just had. So um, it's it's a very weird changeover time frame for people playing Hearthstone. You got used to the game being a certain way. I mean, you even had a different core set for that matter. That's now mostly gone, and the new things are in. Power level has shifted, and things are all over the place. But a lot of times, what happens, like what happened in Forged in the Barrens 2 years ago when that came out, it was a 4 set meta and we wound up with a control priest deck that basically dominated everything. Right now, the thing that's the biggest standout is Blood Death Knight, which is a very strong control deck. benefiting even more so by the fact that it was the brand new class that got released last expansion. So they needed it to be competitive enough to actually keep up with the power level of a 6-set meta. But then they didn't really lose any cards. So all of those cards were like equal power level to like a super strong format. And now the format got way weaker. But Death Knight didn't generally. So and they got new cards that are looking quite strong. So I think that represents a very significant potential problem, and they'll probably address it. But I do like the idea of them just like waiting, let things balance out, give players some time to be creative and try to develop the meta in their own way before they just go ahead and do some tinkering and change things before it really gets a chance to like develop enough.
Yeah. Yeah, and the kind of interesting thing, you and I were talking a little bit before we started recording, and we are at kind of two different places in like the ranked and elo and MMR, right? So the I guess the frequency of that strong deck of like blood DK, from what you're seeing, is a lot higher than how often I'm seeing it. I'm not seeing it very much. I've seen it a little bit, but I'm seeing a much wider range of decks. This month has been a huge struggle, both in game and outside of the game for me. Has been very hectic. So I am still at Diamond 5. I have not hit Legend yet, which feels very, very like odd for me because usually by now I'm already Legend, all that. But I'm seeing a lot of variety, a lot of different decks, people trying out stuff, and especially at Diamond 5, that's a rank floor where even if you lose a bunch, you're not going to lose ranks outside of that Diamond 5. That also gives space for people to just play whatever and experiment more. So I haven't seen as much of that. And I think when we get to the point too where we've had metas, we've had times where there's been really strong decks and they kind of start permeating through like all of the ranked levels. That's usually when the dev team is like, okay, this is really kind of becoming a problem, or if it literally is seeing way too much play at those high ranks. So I don't think we've kind of gotten there quite yet. We might, but I do think that the other thing, especially with the digital card games, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is just that accessibility, right? It's a lot easier for people to just quote unquote basically like net deck, right? That's the
Oh
term
yeah,
for it now. Like, so it's really easy for people to just say, oh wow, this deck is doing really well, or this high level creator, this really popular creator that I saw posted this deck, and then everyone starts playing it. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people start playing it, right? And then it kind of just starts spreading from there. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't really a thing. So that is something that does affect metas, the pace of changes, the pace of how popular, like how fast decks get popular as well. Um, and also, it's kind of hard because when that happens, a deck like that also going to be getting a lot more play, a lot more play testing, whereas decks that maybe actually would beat that aren't getting as much play testing because they're not really getting popular. They're not really getting those eyeballs on them yet.
true. And one other significant factor on top of that when it comes to like the play rate or percentage of, play that a particular deck is seeing is the fact that it is a brand new expansion and there's going to be a lot of players out there who don't have every card from the new expansion yet or not even close in some cases. You might not be able to just uh pop down like the money for the pre-order bundle or even like one of the larger bundles now that you could get, and you're just going off of like gold in game that you have to buy packs and whatever random legendary you open, you'll maybe try to build a deck around that. Except there's already a class that you have most of the cards for anyway, and that's Death Knight. Um, Even in chat, we have someone mention that there's a Frost Death Knight that you can play. That's almost exactly the same deck from last expansion, and it's really good. It probably beats most everything else out there. It's easily like a tier 1 contender for a deck, and it requires you to maybe craft one card, if that. You could honestly run a completely unchanged same deck and do perfectly fine. And I think that is another potential outlier in like some of the data we see is just, oh hey, let me just run the deck I already have all the cards for. It's still good. It's winning. I'm gonna keep playing it. So
Yeah.
that's definitely another thing. The entire class of Death Knight went from bad on release to needs a buff, so they buffed it, and then all the power left, and now it's lingering with the power that they got from getting buffed. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
interesting.
and as you mentioned, so the previous expansion that we had that released in December is when these Death Knights launched, as you mentioned. Now, the way that Hearthstone works and these card releases, the way that they've done these uh, with rotation and the core set cards and the cards specifically for Death Knight, because they did it differently than they did for Demon Hunter, that meant that literally there were no cards that rotated out of standard for Death Knight either. So nothing changed for Death Knight except for they got new stuff added.
Seems
Like
good.
I guess a couple of cards changed, maybe, but like not really, right? Like
Yeah.
they might have done a couple of adjustments or something, but like that's not really a change as significant as what happened with other classes. And so we're kind of seeing that power shift, right? As you mentioned, like Death Knight didn't really lose anything. Other classes did, and now I mean, for Druid, for example, losing Guff, and now I still feel like there's been some pretty good Druid decks, but is it kind of at that same power level? Losing Bran and losing Guff? No,
Oh, I mean,
probably
yeah,
not.
certainly not.
No,
Druid is much
yeah.
weaker than it was. Although I will say there are some fun things that Druid can do. Still in the meta, there's it's probably the only class that can truly exploit the steal your deck and destroy it combo. Um, that she can pair up with Tony, King of Piracy, and the Jailer, because of a Nubercon being a card that enables like mega like big mana cheat in a single turn. And there's the newer card that they got in Zoc, where you can also do a similar like a Nubercon turn, gain a bunch of armor, and summon gigantic health taunts, which is sort of funny. Um, it even brought back a core card we haven't seen played in hardly like years, and that's Crazed Alchemist, which some druids run just to flip the attack and health and one shot kill you with that. So
Wait,
uh,
I haven't seen
you
that.
haven't seen that?
That's
Yeah, so
hilarious.
the Zoc summons, you'll get like a as an example, he summons a couple of one attack 23 health taunts because you did all this armor gain in one turn and got the big summon. And then you just play your Crazed Alchemist and whoop, flip that health to attack, and bam, there's 23 damage to the face, game over. So it's kind of funny. Like it'll protect you,
Nice.
so they're gonna have a really hard time killing you through like 6 or 40 plus health on board and taunts, and then just weaponize it. Um, but it definitely like it pushes much different strategies than what it previously had. So there's some interesting things being developed.
Wow. Yeah, it's well, let's kind of talk about that a little bit as well. Because I kind of not only want to talk about the meta like as it is, but also kind of as this relates, and I think this really kind of does translate to most card games, right? When you have changes like this, there's always kind of this time frame of how there's like the sudden change, and then it feels like things might be changing really rapidly, and then it might start to slow down. Then maybe you have a patch or a balance change hit that might shake things up a little bit. It might be slow to start, then maybe it ramps back up. Like the pace of how metas change and develop is really kind of interesting. And we already talked about how like the influence of, streamers and content creators, people putting out videos on YouTube, and just that like kind of instant access to, data. Like for Hearthstone, we have Vicious Syndicate, HS Replay, all of those other kind of sites like that, you know, like combine all of this data and show you like stats, or say, hey, at all the ranks or at these specific ranks, here's the decks that have the highest win rates, and then people can just go copy that. um, and that really also changes the meta as well, because then it starts skewing like the appearance rate of certain decks. So it's really kind of interesting, like how metas change and develop over time. And I feel like we have had, in the last like several expansions for Hearthstone, the meta has changed, I feel like, very rapidly over the first like week. At least that's
Oh
how I
yeah.
felt. It's like every time I log in, I'll be like log in one day and then the next day and I'm like, wait, where'd all the things go that I was seeing yesterday? And everyone's like, oh yeah, that's like old news. And I'm like, well, that was yesterday. What do you mean old news? Like
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, it can be a breakneck pace for sure. It's just there's there's a lot of different data aggregating websites out there that collect all this information, and as soon as one thing starts rising to the top, you have just lots of people that are crafting a new like game plan to defeat it, and that counter, if it gets strong enough, then needs its own counter. That's why a lot of times people refer to Hearthstone metas being like rock paper scissors meta, because you'll wind up with essentially like some main things that just rise to the top as a tier one, and then you've got this one deck that beats almost everything. So there's a counter deck that beats that. But then there's a different deck that needs to beat that deck, and then of course the original deck beats the deck that beat the deck that beat it, and you just kind of go around in circles. Um, but overall, like it's always fascinating to see how it kind of just falls into place. And I mean, there's like millions of people playing this game and all over the world, so Hearthstone never ever sleeps. You know,
Yeah.
while you're sleeping, the meta might have already gone through a couple of changes. It's wild how crazy some of this stuff can be sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that too, because it's, again, especially with all of the like the digital games and this kind of instant access we have to all these like data sites and all this stuff. But yeah, it's like, okay, by the time, well, it's, for example, right now for me, it's almost 11 a.m. Okay, well, while I was, like you said, while I was sleeping and then getting up, having breakfast, getting ready for this, there were people in Europe or in other parts of the world who were up playing. It was their middle of the day or their, evening, nighttime, and they were playing. And then now they've come up with something, or they've added some card to some deck that's like, oh wow, this is the thing, or they're going to be putting out their content, and then people are going to start seeing that, and then those decks will start appearing, later today maybe for us on those websites, right? Of like, oh, all of a sudden this random deck has like some 83% win rate. You're like, whoa, what? Like what happened? I gotta check this out.
Time to play it, then everyone else plays it too. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And then it's just kind of like that repetitive cycle. And then that's, like you said, it starts getting into that, like, oh, well, that deck's really good now, but then what beats that? Okay, now everyone's playing that thing. Then, oh, now we got to, you're always looking to see what kind of thing is going to beat the big baddie of the meta, right? You're like, okay, that's the big bad guy. Everybody hates that deck. Let's find a deck that beats that thing.
Yep.
Okay, and then just repetitive cycle. So let me ask you, what beats Blood DK right now? Because I would say like probably Death Knight and maybe some Demon Hunter is kind of feeling like, at least the first few days of this meta, like the big baddie of our
Mhm.
initial meta. So what starts to beat that, and what do you kind of predict or think the next like maybe week or so is going to look like?
So it's things are going to get probably increasingly warped unless someone comes up with a creative solution that is better than what we currently have been able to um, decide on so far. Um, that being said, Blood DK doesn't really lose to much of anything right now. I think it's got favorable matchup spreads across the entire board. The only thing that it seems to lose to on a regular, semi-regular basis would be Relic Demon Hunter. Relic Demon Hunter has a very powerful late game type of package with obviously lots of discounts. So Blood Death Knight is currently benefiting from a format where you don't really have a lot of ways to get pushed like extra damage. A lot of lethality has left the meta with the rotation. So you can chip them down and then kill them eventually, right? Well, Blood DK loves when you try to chip them down because they get another turn, and every turn they have that they're still not dead, they just heal up some more and wipe out the chip damage and grind out the victories. The only deck that seems to truly be capable of defeating that strategy at the moment in the late game, consistently at least, would be Relic Demon Hunter, because it can line up a ton of discounts. It can play like a Lady Setheno and a Rowdy Fan, and now you have a 6 attack minion that you maybe spent 0 on that 6 mana play. And then you start playing all of your spells, and it's 6 to the face on every spell on an empty board, and boom, they're dead. So that's kind of how things are going. Relic DH by nature is a slower deck, without the kind of defensive tools that Blood Death Knight has. So the rock paper scissors thing would be, okay, let's find something really aggressive and hit them in the face really hard before they can do their thing. Um,
Yeah.
they
I
do
feel
have
like I
access
was
to like
doing
a little bit of
okay.
heal, but that's about it.
Yeah, not well, not as much as Blood DK does for sure.
Yeah,
But
it's like a one shot heal. Like, so you have to be
yeah,
careful with wide boards. But
yeah,
that's, I mean, that's probably what we're gonna see is like a Blood Death Knight Relic Demon Hunter meta, and then whatever really aggressive thing rises to the top out of the aggressive options.
yeah. I feel like I was actually doing okay against Blood DK with like a big beast hunter, but using big dreams, banjo soar, like getting a bunch of big beasts. Because kind of as you mentioned, it's that like blood boil that kind of deals with the wider small boards. You get a lot of healing.
Mhm.
The big beast hunter doesn't really have that, so it makes their removal and like wide board healing like that kind of awkward. It does kind of suffer from some of their single target removal, though, which there is some of that. So that's kind of, I think, where the deck seems also really powerful. To me, there have been decks in Hearthstone's history that kind of have felt that way, and they have been to the top. And the thing that I like to point out is it feels like the deck kind of has some of everything, right? It has
Yeah.
whiteboard removal, it has single target removal, it has healing, it has their own threats. It has draw. It has all of the different things, and that's what makes a deck so good and why it ends up being at the top because it can do all of the things. Whereas typically decks might lean into one or two strengths, but they kind of lack in the other areas. Like aggressive decks, for example, they're very, very good at putting on that pressure, dealing damage, but they might not really, they might have draw to get through their deck quickly, but they don't really have healing, right? They don't play into necessarily a lot of removal stuff. They kind of have that focus. We've seen other decks that are maybe kind of combo oriented. They might have some draw, maybe they have a little bit of healing, but if they lose some of their like combo pieces, their OTK pieces, they don't really have an alternate win condition. They kind of just falter and lose out after that, right? But it feels like this Death Knight has all of the different things. It has some good stuff for all of those aspects. And I don't know if it's enough to just address one of them with like a balance change. You might have to adjust a few of them. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that would look like, but there's going to be something.
Yeah, it's going to be a very difficult job for the developers. I always like every time I look at a meta that starts to get out of balance. It's just I gain new respect for developers every time when they have to like figure out how to put in the balance patch and try to adjust the meta to a more healthy state. I think they did a great job of it the previous time when we were pretty out of whack in the meta, and it led to a pretty desirable one overall compared to what it had been, and like all the different power level cards in the format. But man, that just seems like such a challenge to balance. And you're right with Death Knight right now, Blood Death Knight especially. It's a control deck, and a control deck usually has to pick its lane. Like choose your strength and your weakness. You can be better against wide boards. You could be better against single targets. You could have like this amount of health gain, or you could have this amount of other removal. Blood Decay is like, yeah, all of the above. I'll take all of those.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
been a challenge to defeat right now, and it is a lot of what I'm seeing on the ladder. Sadly, it kind of drowns out some of the more cooler things that I was interested in seeing more of. Um, but all it takes sometimes is just a few tweaks here and there, a mana cost bump on one or two cards or something, and we might wind up in a place where there's a lot more things that are more playable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Which I guess I want to shift gears a little bit here, and we're speaking of gears, let's talk about mechs. I would like to talk about mech stuff
Hey,
because uh, we had with this core set, right, a bunch of mech stuff. Magnetize is back, everyone's favorite card. Mostly everyone's favorite card, I guess. Ziliax is back, but there's also some good stuff, and I have seen some people talking about Mech Paladin and Mech Mage because we do still have Colossals. So Gaia for Mage is still in the meta that kind of helps Mech Mage. And it's kind of interesting. I think today I might focus during my stream on playing some of those mech decks just to kind of see how they do. But also, you mentioned earlier about how some players might not have a lot of the new cards. Maybe they, are kind of returning, or they just are more of a free to play or don't spend as much money. And the mech decks are generally more budget friendly. They might have a few legendaries in them, like the Gaia that I mentioned, but I don't think they usually run very many legendaries. So they're also kind of more
true.
budget friendly, which I think is a great option for people who are kind of coming back, or maybe not like at those top levels of like legend, but at other ranks. But how do you feel so far about like the mechs, or have you seen people talking about those mech decks even outside of legend?
Yeah, I've seen people hyping up Mech Mage a decent amount. I personally wasn't too impressed with it, but I have very low sample sizes, and when you just run into a Blood Death Knight, sometimes it's like, okay, I can't really assess what's going on with this class because it's just overwhelmed by another. Um, but like Mech Mage looks pretty interesting and might be playable. The one I'm more impressed with by far is Mech Paladin. Mech Paladin actually seems to have some real game, and can even beat Blood Death Knights with the way that they can line up a bunch of divine shields. We talked before, one of Death Knight's best power cards when you make a wide board is Blood Boil. They just lifesteal, damage everything on your board. And that buys them just enough time because they're taking a lot of damage until they get to like their more powerful turns. But if you give everything Divine Shield, they heal nothing on that turn. And then you can just kill them before they stabilize. So, like, that's been really kind of sweet. And the deck is pretty aggressive. There's a new card that Mech Paladin runs in a weapon that you can get buffs on a minion on your board kind of whenever you want to, because you can pretty much control when you use the last charge of the weapon to proc the death rattle and buff a minion. And it keeps going up the more minions you play. So it means everything, anything that ever survives the board becomes potentially a massive threat to end the game. Uh, Things
Yeah.
like that. It's really cool for Paladin. Like that is it's got some power, and I think it could be a real competitor. Uh, we're we're gonna have to keep an eye on that and see if that maybe finds a way to challenge the Death Knight supremacy. We'll find out.
Yeah. I'm excited because I was a huge fan of Mech Paladin in the past. So I'm like, if Mech Paladin is back, I'm excited. I want to play that. But yeah, the Divine Shield's definitely a huge thing. And, it's kind of interesting that you mention about like something living on the board and kind of being a threat because I feel like I was talking about this last night with some other content that I was working on about Death Knight too. You kind of mentioned the non-relic Death Knight that kind of focuses a little bit more on like it's like the Rush, Outcast, Lady Steno stuff, and in that deck as well with the new legendary Halveria, leaving a couple of 1/1s on the board
Yep.
also somehow becomes a threat because then you play Halveria. Those rush minions now can attack face and they are rushed. So one attacks and then everything gets an attack buff. And then the next one attacks and it's kind of, that like exponential stacking damage. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like it's been a little while since we've had a meta where leaving even a couple of things on the board is enough of a threat. I feel like we've had metas like that before, but I feel like it's been a little bit since we really had something like that. So I'm kind of interested to see how long that lasts.
Yeah. It'll be. I mean, the options there are really powerful. So it just depends on what a future balance change might bring to really bring some other outliers in line. We might be seeing a board based deck like takeover potentially. Um, but there's still a lot of control stuff that handles it too well right now. But if we get some tweaks, that I mean, the power level's there. It's just that there are a lot of answers right now in some strong control decks. Like I think Control Priest is also on the rise, uh, similar to how it was in Forged in the Barrens 2 years ago. Um, if that ever gets put in check, you might see Mech Paladin and Outcast DH just completely dominate. So balance changes definitely a very very tricky thing, and that's going to be what determines our meta mostly. Because I don't think this current meta that we have is going to be one that lasts for all that long.
No, I don't think so. Whether it's somebody, kind of starts finding decks that do well against these kind of couple of top decks, or it's that these decks have to end up changing via balance changes. Something's going to happen fairly soon, right? So, yeah, it's going to be I mean, I will say that kind of cadence of how often things are getting changed. You and I recently for Amberflight Gaming, our team, we did a like 9 years of Hearthstone, right? We took some decks from Hearthstone's history. One of those was from the original, like 2014, right? We talked about uh, Undertaker Hunter. And we talked about the fact that that deck was so strong for 6 months, 6 months before it got
Yeah.
changed. We don't have metas like that anymore, right? Like if something goes for like a month and it's at the top, that's like everyone's like, this has been strong for so long, like get
Yeah.
rid of it. That deck was insane for like 6 months. So yeah, I don't think that these decks are going to be at this power level for this long. And it's kind of interesting too, though, because with how fast things change too, sometimes there's like small changes. It might be similar, but it's not quite the same, right? You might still have like maybe Blood DK and Outcast DH or Fell Relic DH. Well, I guess it's not even Fell anymore, is it? Because Jace left. It's just Relic DH.
Yeah, just
Uh,
relic. You have a few fail spells, but there's no
yeah,
payoff for that. It's like
but like
Sitheno relic.
yeah, those decks like might still be good, but they're not going to be like the end all be all decks of the meta. I think a really good example of that was in the past when Rogue was really powerful. They made a couple of changes to Rogue, and then like that, I think around the time Edwin got changed, and that had been really good, and then it was still pretty good. It just wasn't like a menace that was like destroying everything, right? It was still good though. So it's hard to say like, oh, I think some people have this expectation of the meta is going to change, and then like that deck that was at the top is like non-existent now. Well, that might not be the case. It might still be existent, but just not as powerful. But sometimes, like you said, even just slight adjustments might be enough just to bring some other stuff into the meta, kind of bring some other things up a little bit. I also am a huge fan of buffs. Personally, I like seeing buffs and not just like, oh, these things are too powerful, nerf, nerf, nerf. I like seeing when they mix things up too with like, hey,
Yeah.
this stuff isn't seeing play. And as you mentioned as well, sometimes there's like really cool things. You're like, hey, all these cool new cards, and like nobody's playing them. Like, okay, let's buff them, bring them in, and then people can play those cool things. Death Knight got buffed, right? We saw the relics weren't getting played, and they were super cool, but they weren't getting played very much, and then they got buffed. I feel like there are some cards. The like Warrior Rifts maybe is something that could get buffed that could end up seeing some play that I think would be super cool.
Yeah.
Maybe some Warlock stuff, maybe some of like the Death Rattle things across. There's a few classes. Um, but I think there are some really cool things. Is there anything that was like super cool to you that we haven't seen yet for this expansion?
Um, I mean, out of the things that I thought were really interesting looking was like the Warlock Symphony spell. Warlock doesn't seem to be quite competitive enough to see a whole lot of play, but I thought that one was like a really cool looking card and very interesting effect that I'd like to see a little bit more of. Maybe I'll regret that statement though, because it does a lot. The Shaman Jive Insect, like getting to summon Ragnaros, is really interesting and fun. Um, Hunter has a lot of really cool things, and I'm always super biased because Hunter's my favorite class. It even got Dragonbane back in the core set, which I think is awesome. But it's kind of getting, especially Hunter. I think it's crowded out by a heavy like control presence, and uh, Mage, there was like a light show type of thing that could be toxic, but the idea's kind of like fun that you play a light show and then you play more light shows and it just keeps scaling up in damage is like an interesting thing to do. None of those are really getting to see a whole lot of play though at the moment. I'd like to see some more of that get I don't know, more viable, but I don't think in this case it'd be a buff. I think the cards themselves are strong enough. It's just the rest of the meta's kind of crowding things out. And it's still a little early to call it necessarily like a true meta. It's still in process of forming, but we have some trends already. Very
Oh, yeah.
significant trends.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting that you're talking about light show and stuff because, as I mentioned, with talking about the different like levels, right? Different MMR, different ELO, like however you want to phrase that, different ranks. You are at that like very kind of top end of ladder. I've actually been seeing, I like I don't know if I should say decent amount, but I've been seeing some of like a late show mage, maybe like a Naga spell mage. So people are definitely trying it. People are playing with it, but maybe it's really not appearing as like as much at that higher level.
I believe we might have a real-time change here too. I just saw someone mention, yeah, like this, I think this happened like 8 minutes ago. There's a patch. There's a patch right now. So we were thinking, hey, that probably won't patch for like a couple weeks, right? No, no, no. Immediate patch. They have changed
Live,
3 cards.
live on the
Um,
show. We're getting this. Wow.
it's incredible. So patch 26.0.2. Uh, It is a data-only hotfix patch, so it means things are going to change immediately. And they are changing the Death Knight Construct Quarter. This card has already now been nerfed twice. If you remember, it was a 3 mana with 3 charges when it first got released. It got changed to 4 mana, and just now it has been changed to have 2 durability instead of 3 durability. So Construct Quarter, definitely one of Death Knight's most powerful cards, is now a 4 mana location that only has the 2 charges for the 4/5 undead rushers. That's change number 1. Change number 2 is to Outcast DH, Vengeful Walloper, which I believe originally had been buffed from 7 mana to 6 mana, has had its buff removed. You can call it a nerf, you can call it a revert of a buff, whatever you like. It's 7 mana. The 7 mana rush 5/5 that gets its discount for each Outcast card you've played this game. I guess the Outcast cards were too good and too prevalent. It was becoming 0 too often, so they bumped it back up that 1 mana. And lastly, another mana cheat card in Light Ray for Paladin. It has been a 9 mana card, 5/5 taunt that costs less for each Paladin card you played this game. It is now 10 mana.
Wow.
Interesting.
Life changes.
So, I mean,
All
Blood
right.
Decay did immediately get a nerf, as did all Death Knights. So we'll see if that might be anything significant to try to keep their power in line. We talked about Demon Hunter, Relic Demon Hunter being a check to Blood Death Knight's power, but Outcast Demon Hunter was kind of an early front runner for like best deck in the meta before the rise of Blood Death Knight, and its power level is very high, so it's getting checked a little bit too. And then Paladin, if you look on HS Replay, where you usually see most of the data aggregated for Hearthstone games, Paladin has far and away the highest win rate in the format. There's a lot of really powerful aggressive Paladin decks, pure Paladin decks that run a top end of that elemental, the discount elemental with taunt that you can of course tutor into your hand with playing Order in the Court, and that seems to have been noticed, and they're trying to bring it in line.
Yeah, this is really, really interesting. Very quick changes. And like you said, kind of just small adjustments, a couple of minions, only one card for each of the 3 classes here. So it's not like they're going, oh, this needs addressed right now, like Banhammer, like, hit these things really hard. These are just really slight adjustments. I'm kind of surprised, honestly, that it took this long to put Construct Quarter at 2 uses. I feel like that was something that was suggested and recommended when it was kind of on the table for nerfs in the past. I mean, going up to 4 mana, I do think ended up being very, very good. But, having then 2 uses instead of 3 seems pretty good. I know it's not going to change, but I still hate that it has 5 health. I would still like it to be a 4/4.
Yeah,
But
the 5 health is insane.
yeah. I'm really interested to see how this now kind of changes over like the weekend. We've had the launch was what 3 days ago now. I think it's been exactly like 3 days,
Hmm.
right? Tuesday came out, and then to the hour, it is now Friday. So they're putting in these changes, and now I'm kind of curious to see like over the weekend and then into Monday how things go, how things change and develop with this. I don't know if this is enough to really change blood DK. At least from my like personal feeling, is that ha- is this enough to like change that deck? And the Walloper wasn't being played is not being played in the Relic DH, right?
Yeah, but the main reason for the rise of Relic DH is probably as a counter to um, so many Blood Death Knights. So if you are weakening Blood Death Knight, you're opening the avenue more for Outcast Demon Hunter. So I can see the general philosophy that it's like, okay, we can't just nerf a powerful deck's counter, and let the powerful deck be untouched. Because Relic Demon Hunter can struggle against other aggressive things that should be more prevalent if Blood Death Knight takes a bit of a step back.
Yeah. Yep. Do you think the change to Construct Order is enough to actually change Blood DK, or do you think it's the rise of other things that's going to impact that more?
I think it just points to the new design philosophy. I do like that they are making minor, like, um, just like not like wide sweeping changes, like minor tweaks. They're like, okay, things are getting a little out of hand here. It took them 72 hours. I mean, that's pretty fast. That's a pretty fast turnaround from, the expansion launching. And they're like, okay, yeah, one of the bigger power outlier cards of Death Knight, all Death Knights, not just Blood DK. So it also impacts Unholy and Frost, which I think is a good decision, to hit a card that is run in all Death Knight archetypes because it's so good. Knocking down that one extra durability could be huge. I don't think it's enough to really check the power of Blood DK with what we're seeing in the meta, but it helps. Um, Anything that makes it just a little bit weaker, opens up a little bit more space for other decks to get there. It might be the difference in a game. Whereas before you would have lost because they still had another charge, now they don't, and they can't have another 4 or 5 rusher to remove your minion that did just enough damage to push your lethal or something like that. So every little bit might count. I think it's just like a cautious approach. Like, okay, we don't want to mess with things too much. The meta's still developing.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
just tweak a tiny bit on some of these things that look a little bit power outlier, and then we'll reassess. So they still
Yeah.
might do like a bigger balance patch in like a couple weeks.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure that they still will want to do that patch in like about 2 weeks after the expansion. So, like you said, this is kind of just a seems to be like a just let's do a small touch on a couple of these things and then reevaluate how things are going and start looking at that data for the patch that is, you know, I really like scheduled, I'll say quote unquote scheduled preemptively scheduled for 2 weeks after the expansion, that they've talked about that they have done for the last several now. And it seems to be, I think, a good cadence just to kind of adjust. So, yeah, very interested to see how these adjustments go. But overall, like, I guess just my feelings of the expansion as a whole. Overall, as you mentioned, like right off the top, new cards, always fun. I love playing the new stuff, trying out new things. The first day, I played my own build of a like big beast hunter and did really well. I went like 18 or yeah, I don't know, like 18 and 8 or something. Like, did really well, and I was
Nice.
super proud. I'm like, yeah, like I built something that's doing well, on the first day. That was a great feeling. But the last few days, like I am not a player that typically does well when things are changing very quickly or when I don't know what to expect from decks. So I also have been feeling like I'm struggling and it's almost leading to a little bit of tilt because I'm like, oh, okay, cool. We just died of that stupid thing that I didn't think about, like, oh, great, okay. Or like they'll play something, I'm like, oh, I thought that card was going to be bad and now I just lost to it. Well, that sucks. So, it's been both fun and cool, but also a little bit frustrating just because I'm not a player that does well in these like new metas, in these um, interesting, changing, fast paced metas. Like, I just don't have good win rates usually in those metas. So it's fun to play the new stuff, but also I feel like I'm struggling with my win rate and they're kind of conflicting, right? I'm like, I want to have fun. I want to try all these different decks and these random builds, but also I hate losing a bunch. So I'm like, I don't want to just copy these good decks. Like, I want to
Yeah,
play my things and I want to play fun stuff, but
yeah.
no, I hate losing. This sucks.
I mean, it's always a conflict to try to resolve when you're in the early days of new expansions, because there's just so many things out there that are much more powerful than, the, oh, this could be cool or that could be fun ideas that you want to try. Because people are in the process of like refining decks and pulling decks from websites that have a bunch of data that say this is optimized in this way or that way. And for me personally, I just try to throw it out the window. It's just like, yep, I'm just gonna lose a whole bunch, and that's what I've been doing. I've been playing a lot of very different, fun decks. On my stream, I've had viewers just send me whatever deck they cooked up or heard of, or whatever the case might be, and I'm like, yeah, just go ahead and send me a code, and I'll play the deck, and we'll see how it goes. And I just lose and lose and lose and lose. And in large part, it's because hey, here's a deck with a cool, fun idea, or like fights for board. Oh, there's another Death Knight opponent. Oh, okay, here's another Death Knight opponent. Oh, look, it's another Death Knight opponent. So you kind of feel like hopeless before you even start in some of the games, the way that the meta trends have gone. Maybe the patch can help that a little bit, but I feel like it's just something you kind of have to, if you want to play like the newer, fun, cool ideas, you kind of have to just accept the fact that it's not going to be as competitive, and I'm probably going to be in store for a lot of losing.
Yeah. Yeah. It is tough. Sometimes I think, especially as a streamer, I kind of put that pressure on myself to like, I have to win, I have to have a good rank, otherwise people won't want to watch me. And, sometimes it's like, I just need to kind of get over that. And like, I think people will watch me if I'm enjoying it a lot more. And if I'm not, then, that will be very noticeable. So,
Yep.
I did not expect a change today, especially while we were live recording this.
Right?
So,
That's new.
thank you to our live chat who let us know that just dropped, so that we could talk about that. And I'm excited to try some stuff out. Is there any like anything else specifically that you feel like you want to mention before we wrap things up?
I gotta
I know.
say, shout out to Sidisi, who immediately noticed and posted what the change of Light Ray means for Hunter, which is there's a Hunter card called Jungle Jammer, and you summon a random cost beast based on how many spells you played while you've had that weapon equipped. Once you get the Death Rattle, it will summon that beast. There were 3 9-mana beasts in the pool. Light Ray's been nerfed. Light Ray now costs 10. That means there are 2 9-mana beasts in the pool, and one of them is King Crush. So we have a 50% chance of King Crush if you play 9 spells while you have a Jungle Jammer equipped, and that's beautiful.
Oh, that's great.
Excited for coin
Yes,
flips.
that's right. Uh,
Speaking of coin flips, I do have to mention also I did already get a Dragonbane coin flip lethal setup just yesterday. I knew it was gonna happen. It was amazing. Got the opponent to 7 health. You press the button. There's 1 minion on board. Will it go face or minion? It hit the minion. They were blood DK. I lost. But still, it
oh,
was it was cool that we had the chance. Next time it's gonna happen.
wait, wait, the 50, you lost the
I lost the
50-50?
50-50 and they
You were,
immediately healed, and next thing I knew they were at like 30 health. If it had won the
oh,
coin flip, I would have won the game. That's,
oh, disaster.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those things, but
Oh,
there are cool things that are on the horizon. And I know the bounce patch team is clearly like watching the meta closely. Obviously, we can see that they did a 72-hour like mini patch, but I expect more changes will be coming without too much time to pass.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to keep like testing things and keep seeing what else comes about, and not having to face 3 4 5s with Rush sounds pretty sweet.
There
I'm
you go.
excited for that. Um, But thank you, Ron, for going through this with me and chatting about this. I know you've been looking forward to this since pretty much ever since we knew when the expansion was coming. You're like, all right, I'm going to be
Oh
talking
yeah.
about it. Like, let's go.
Oh yeah.
Um, so thank you everybody for joining us as well. Do want to just kind of iterate. We didn't have like a ton of news or competitive stuff this week, and we really wanted to dig deeper into this. So next week we will have a bit more news and a bit more organized play again for some of those other card games. And the big one that we have is Disney Lorcana did release their like rules and how to play the game that's coming out in the fall. So I think next week we're probably going to take a bit of a deeper look into that, kind of our initial thoughts about Disney Lorcana. Now, a couple weeks ago, we had Jared from now I'm drawing a blank, Citizens of Lorcana on the show talking about like what we knew about Disney Lorcana at that point. But now that we have the rules and stuff, we can kind of dig a little bit deeper and talk about that. So if you are a fan of card games and you want to look at something that's going to be coming out later this year, we also have Battle Spirit Saga coming out this month. So lots of new things. Very, very excited. So we will be going over all of that. But if you have any suggestions, ideas, things that you want to see us talk about, people you want us to have on the show, or if you want to be on the show yourself, let us know. Reach out to us. Send us an email at tccgroundtable@protonmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at TCCG Roundtable. And we also have our top pinned tweet there. We have our Discord. You can usually find that in our show notes if you want to join in our Discord and chat about some different card games. And then you can also just, check us out everywhere that we do audio podcasts. We do put out a version for audio listeners as well. And if you do want to watch our video versions, you can find that on my personal YouTube channel, dragonrider TCCG, and I've also been live streaming on my Twitch, also dragonrider TCCG. So you can find us there, and definitely we would love to have you also check out our affiliates, which is Inked Gaming. You can help directly support us and get some sweet things like play mats and other card game accessories if those strike your fancy. So we'll have a link for that in the show notes as well. And then you can also find us individually. Ron, where can people find you?
So you can find me on Twitch primarily. I'll be streaming every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern on my Twitch channel at RonMexico HS. You can find me on YouTube at RonMexico HS, and you can find me on Twitter at Ron_HS.
Awesome. Yes. Fantastic stream. If you haven't checked out Ron's stream, definitely recommend you do that. Talks through all of his plays. I know a lot of people like really, really love that they can learn a lot from you. So definitely check that out. As for me, you can find me on Twitter, DawnieDK, DAWNIEDK. And as I mentioned, Twitch, YouTube, all of that, dragonrider TCCG, talking all things there. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this week, and we'll see you at the roundtable.